And welcome. And Chris and Lori, if you want to take it away, I will say thank you and see you at the end.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to our session on deeper discussions. And I'm Chris Street, and I'm joined by Lori Campbell.
Hello.
I'm going to jump to the next slide and talk to you a little bit about who we both are and why we're here today. I'm a professor of secondary education at Cal State Fullerton, and I also direct our online graduate program in secondary education. So we have students, most of our students are in California, where our campus is near Disneyland, but we also have students as far away as Taiwan, East Coast, all over the country really. And I'm also a QM peer reviewer. And Lori and I are involved in a California curriculum project for high schools. It started for high school seniors, and it's an English course that has, the curriculum is also available for grades 7 through 12. So we'll be referencing examples from this curriculum that we refer to as ERWC, Expository Reading and Writing Curriculum. So that's Lori and I's connection, and I want to let her introduce herself a little bit, and then we'll jump in.
Okay. I am the English curriculum developer and department chair for a program in the Kern High School District called Kern Learn. So this is our distance learning program where students can still be connected to their campuses, but get their A through G required through the CSU, get their curriculum for college prep online with highly qualified educators. And so the program started 5 years ago with just a team of 5, and it's been a wonderful team. And now that we've been in this for 5 years, we're getting the feeling that we know what we're doing now. So, and the ERWC was something that I needed to develop anyway. And then I found out I needed to ask permission to do that. And so it's really kind of blossomed into this ability to make the certain curriculum high quality with the assistance of Quality Matters, so that we can provide the same quality that's within a face-to-face classroom online. So that's who I am.
And I'm sure many of you are feeling the same way. Lori and I are being inundated with folks who are searching for help with how to put the curriculum that was developed for a face-to-face setting into online settings. So we are going to repurpose this presentation probably next week for California English teachers who are now scrambling for how to do exactly what Lori's been doing for years, which is teach this curriculum in an online setting. So one of the ways that we have both found helpful is to focus on online discussions and how to do them well. So you can see our objectives there, and I do want to talk a little bit about kind of the focus for this session. So this is kind of, I would say this is more for folks who are fairly new to online text-based threaded discussions. And we also have, all of our examples are really drawn from Lori's high school classroom. So they're seniors in high school, and that's where most of the examples that we're drawing from are gonna be coming. So we won't be offended if somebody's really looking for college applications and decides to slip away. You'll see a lot more high school examples here. I teach almost exclusively online, post-bac and graduate courses, but Lori is teaching grades 9 through 12. So she's really giving kids an introduction to how to do well in online settings, and the discussion tool is pretty integral to that. So when we think about teaching and we think about quality teaching, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's online, I think we really need to be very intentional and deliberate and thinking carefully about the decisions we're making. So there are lots of different ways to think about what quality teaching looks like. One that's been around for a long time that I think is still just as appropriate now as it was when it came out are these 7 principles for good practice in undergraduate education. And if you just take a second to look through those different items, those different bullet points, I think about them as being just, in essence, good practice And when I think about whether or not this is face-to-face or online, I think that actually those 7 principles can work equally well in face-to-face settings or in online settings. But in an online setting, we have to be even more, I think, intentional about how we structure things, how we set things up. So there are a couple different ways to do online instruction. One of them, which we are not going to spend much time talking about, is the shovelware approach, where people dump their materials online, and then the students are kind of weeding through that material, and they're feeling isolated, they're feeling alone, and that is not what we are advocating for. We much prefer a learning communities approach, where students are participating in instructor-guided group learning as part of a community of practice. So option 2, learning communities, is what we're all about. It's an integral part of the online program that I teach in at the master's level. And it's an integral part of what Lori is developing with her high school students. So we're going to focus mostly on the discussion board as a way to develop and foster online learning communities. So how do we do that in a face-to-face setting? A sense of community, it really can naturally occur on its own. Kids are going to interact, students are going to interact before school or before class, after class. They're going to socialize. They're going to find a way to create community, whether we as teachers or professors do anything at all. It will happen. But in an online setting, we really need to create and we need to sustain that sense of community. So how do we do that? We have found that the discussion board can be a real tool for community building. And the examples that you'll see here, we're not going to read every word of them, but you hopefully can glance at them and get a sense of some of the different approaches that Lori's taking with her high school students for introducing themselves and starting to develop that sense of community. So we feel, and I very much agree with this, that introducing yourself first is a great way to start. This is going to allow students, whether they're college or high school, I think, to start to see that there's value in the discussion forum. So some of the advantage of online discussions, if you're not new to these, you're already aware that obviously they can happen almost anytime, anywhere. It's really where a deeper understanding of the course material can be forged, as well as connecting students with one another and with their instructors. And it really provides an opportunity for learning by extending the classroom. So even if you're teaching in a hybrid setting, the discussion board can have value for extending that classroom beyond the 4 walls in which you're working. And I think it also really promotes critical thinking, a sense of a shared cognition and higher order thinking. And it's an interactive, engaged audience for students to write in. So a lot of what we're going to be sharing with you are examples from Lori's high school class. And she's an English teacher. And so obviously teaching writing and working with students on their writing is a big part of the course. And the discussion forums give students a real world, authentic place to be interactive, to engage with an outside audience beyond the teacher when they're working on their writing. So it's a good idea, I think, to start with a low stress discussion if this is new for you and you haven't done any before. It could be graded, it could not be graded. So introducing yourself is a great first step. And this is how Lori's introduced the introductory discussion forum for her class with high school students. And
did you want me to chime in? Okay. So I actually got this idea from, I went to InstructureCon, which is the Canvas kind of like huge commercial that they have for all their wonderful parts of Canvas. But I was really looking for how do we develop these deeper conversations. And this was a mother and daughter team that had showed this idea where the first thing is there is an introductory, but rather than just the typical, what's something that others wouldn't know about you, something like that. They say to actually tie it to your curriculum. And so for this one, I had students, they had, you know, a toy that they really liked or a book that they really liked. And then they had to connect how that was related to their dream, what their goal is. Because remember, these are seniors. One of the other things I wanted to tell you was I know that with colleges, there's the way that you set up the navigation, the discussions is kind of off to the side, and you go and you look at the discussion and you respond. I actually make my discussions part of a module. So I set it up in a linear format so the students have to actually get to this first before they do anything else. And I've actually made this a separate module. And so anytime a student enters, with high school, we have students coming in all the time. And so this is actually the first one that they have to do in order to move on. And this is just credit, no credit. They always get credit for submitting. But this is a way too that students can go back and look at, hey, who am I talking to anyway? And so this is kind of what we have set up. But I always make sure that I have the first one up. And so this is the one that I did. It gives a connection for students to see who I am and where my head is at. And so always start with yourself. And one of the things that Chris taught me this is that you save it, and then when you build the next semester, when you're getting ready to copy for the next semester of your course, just copy and paste it, so it's always there. This was actually a student contribution, and it's I'm not going to read these to you, but I did put the part where, you know, if you don't have this toy anymore, you can look for it, and just giving a picture, something visual online. And if you want to go ahead and do the next one, Chris, this one was really interesting because it was a childhood picture with the toy itself. And these are really touching. I enjoy getting these from the students because it does help me learn who my students are, because chances are I probably will hardly ever see them in person. So this is just the first step in building that community.
Thank you, Lori. So in Lori's class, she's the first to post, as am I in my college class. So when students enter my class, there's a discussion forum already there for them as their first activity, and they will see and read my post first. And so that's a way for us to model our expectations and to know who we are as instructors. They get to know who we are as people first, and before we get into the content of the course. Some instructors set this up as kind of a zero module or a null module, where it's just an interactive getting to know one another activity. Others build it into the first content focused module. Either way, I think the key is to get people knowing one another as people before we dive into the content. So we really need, in order for all of this to work, we really need active participation and engagement by everybody. And if we have that engagement, it can lead to learning and a sense of community. So what exactly is an online learning community? I liken it to being a member of an online learning community to being kind of like riding on a bus, except that for this analogy, everybody in the community is also a driver of that bus. So we can't just have one person driving and everybody else passive. For this to really work well, everybody has to contribute, otherwise the community won't work well. If you have experience with online learning communities, you may already know this book by Paloff and Pratt, and it's been one of the most influential resources I've ever worked with in this area. And they suggest that in the online classroom, it's the relationships and the interactions among people through which knowledge is primarily generated. And I definitely agree with that. I have written letters of recommendation for students that I have never met face to face, but I know them intimately. I know them very, very well. And I've been involved in a lot of research on online learning communities, and students really can feel connected and part of something meaningful if you take the time to build it. So if you want to take a deeper dive into building online learning communities, this would probably be my first and foremost recommendation by Pratt and Paloff. So why do we use the discussion board as a community building tool as an integral part of our online classes? Well, it's a place where the substance of the course can be discussed. It's certainly the place, one place, where a sense of an online learning community can be built and nurtured. And then it's also the place for us, for expertise of the instructors, to be tapped as we are providing clarification, answering questions. We are also redirecting off-topic discussions. We're teaching skills. We're emphasizing important concepts. We're synthesizing threads, all kinds of things we need to be doing as instructors. So over almost 20 years now of teaching online courses, some of the things that I've noticed that successful online students do, they typically get in early and post, so they see it as an opportunity to engage as opposed to just an assignment that has to be completed 2 minutes before the deadline. They take the time to craft their posts in a word processing program first, and then copy and paste them after running spelling grammar checks so that it's as well written as it can be. They follow the guidelines, they're responding to others thoughtfully. And this is a biggie, and we'll take a little bit of time in our presentation to talk about this. How do we help students to integrate course content into the posts? Because we don't want, I agree, I disagree, we want substance. And that is maybe one of the hardest things to pull off in online threaded discussions, but we can help students to do it well. So they're writing clearly, carefully. They're getting into the logging in often, and they are reading all those announcements and keeping up with things. So this is a big area for us, integrating course content into posts. We do want our students to voice their opinions, but we also want to see them supporting their thinking with evidence. So how can we help them to do this well? So we can, I think, expect students to use the words of others to support their thinking if we show them how. So by that, I mean, we're probably going to be expecting students to be summarizing, to be paraphrasing, to be quoting directly from course content, and we want them to do that well, but we are probably going to have to help them with how to do that well. And we can do that if we show them. So by modeling what we expect, we can really help students to see what it means to use the words of others to support their own thinking. And I think the online discussion forums do provide a real audience for their thinking, because what they contribute is visible to everybody in the course. And then we can model for our students what we expect by the kind of posts that we are contributing. So what's the role of the teacher in all of this? We really need to take time to craft guidelines and expectations up front and to make those clear to students. So a few slides later, we'll link to the rubrics and our guidelines that we use to clearly and effectively set those parameters and set our expectations for students before they ever get into their first discussion. Choose something interesting, choose something that students want to talk about. And visibility. Lori and I are both very active in our online discussions, especially early in those first few online discussions, so that we are a member of this community, we're participating, and we are contributing, we're asking questions, we're responding to several students in every discussion. And then model what we expect through our own posts. That's important for students, especially Lori's high school students who are just learning how to do this. Seeing her model, and we'll show you some examples of that, is really important. So let's take a look at a few examples. This is just a piece of my rubric in terms of the criteria for quality. My rubric, I have two sides of my rubric. One is for an assessment of quality, and the other is an assessment of quantity. So both areas are important, and the rubric addresses both of those. So Lori, maybe I can hand things over to you for a minute, and you can
Okay,
talk us through some of the ways that you've helped your students get started with online
okay,
discussions.
sure. And I think that, well, all the English teachers out there will understand about the sentence stems and why they're so important. And this is where academic conversation really starts. And the students truly do not know what that's all about. And very often when I do get those I agrees, there's usually a good work attached to them. So though the bad habits that teachers have used all these years, they wear off on these students. So we really do need to teach them how to go about writing academically. Some of the things I do is, first of all, if a student's not writing in complete sentences, they're going to get flagged for that first. And it's just a nice little message that says, I am expecting you to write in complete sentences from now on because that helps us to understand better. And so starting with the freshman class, I do give them some sentence stems so that they can begin with that. Go ahead and move to the next one, Chris.
I will in just 1 minute. I just want to mention a resource in case teachers are not familiar with it. These stems such as these are in part of a book called They Say, I Say, and that is used as a writing teachers across the country using that middle school through university. And so if you don't know They Say, I Say, there are a lot of good sentence frames that are designed to help students, not to enable them, but to serve as heuristics to build upon. And if you just Google They Say, I Say templates, you'll find many templates like the ones Lori has here, in addition to a whole bunch others that would be appropriate for college students as well.
And before we move on, I should probably also explain a couple other things here. So this is the first time that they're going to be reading an article. And so this kind of helps with reading comprehension. So the article is linked there, but I also have that orange box is a link to a resource, and it's it's a video of me actually showing how I annotate, because it's another thing students don't really know how to do. What are they supposed to highlight? What are they supposed to look for? So that's a video that I actually have linked in the class resources, and then it's linked again here so that they can figure out what do I need to look for when I'm annotating. So with this discussion board, the purpose is to get the first read done and then to see what the initial comprehension is. So let's go ahead and move to the next one. And this one, you know, you always have the stellar kid in class. This is the stellar kid, but he wrote a very good, concise response. And I went ahead and in this particular example, he had posed a question. So I asked him another question: which instances do you feel you are in the minority? There are a lot of stereotypes that relate to males, or the situations you're talking about. And so this is an extension question. Because he is my stellar student, he can do more. And so I did do the stretch on that. And if we go to the next one, guess what he did? He responded back to me with an even longer one. And this one had a better example, a more illustrative example of the point that he was trying to make. So this really is an academic conversation. And the best part is that you can meet students' needs based on what they're able to do. So this is my stellar student. I got him to write even more than he already wrote. If we go to the next one, this is one of my struggling students. And notice that she really, I'm assuming it's she, actually don't know. Daisy, not now. If she used these sentence stems, and she still came up with some information. So it didn't feel like she was struggling at all. These are very good statements that she could make. And in the next slide, we see my response. And these are really well-constructed statements, always positively reinforcing what the students do right. And I can see you've thought deeply about this. So let's see here. Part of the problem is I've got to get these windows off of mine so I can see a little better. I do hope that we have made more progress toward your fourth statement. I think we have, after seeing the last 20 years of how stereotyping and prejudice is slowly getting beaten down. We still have a long way to go. And so it's valuing the student's response, even though, you know, this was completely formulaic, she's still expressing her ideas, and I want to give her value to her ideas. So that's important all the time. When I'm responding to these types of responses, I will make sure in the beginning I always respond to every student's contribution. Eventually after that though, I'll take, depending on the class and how many I have, probably about 4 or 5 responses that I'll do for a specific conversation. And that's just so that the students always can hear back from me on how well they're communicating academically.
All right, thank you, Lori. So I just want you to think about these bullet points, if you would, just for a minute. We're going to have some time. We'll pause and take some questions and some of your ideas in just a few minutes. But if you were teaching a course, especially one that valued the quality of writing from students, what aspects might you focus on? You know, how might you guide your students? What do you think your students might need? What kind of resources are they going to need? You could see that Lori built in the annotation tool as well as the sentence frames as ways to support her students. And then what questions might you ask as the instructor to facilitate learning to guide your students to that next level? So just a quick look at the same discussion board previous year without Lori taking the time to model responses and without clear expectation. Well, the point being that without clear expectations and guidance and teacher feedback, this is more what students will do on their own. We're not going to get them to truly engage online or develop as thinkers or writers unless we are there to provide expectations, to guide, and to provide feedback.
Those I agrees, they can get pretty tiresome after a while. But it truly is, the student is sitting there not really knowing how to respond to this. So it is definitely skills that we have to teach. And I'm starting early. I'm starting freshman year, freshman, sophomore, junior, seniors. They are all, and the questions get more complicated through the module, and I do expect more and more of them as the semester goes on through the courses.
So in the next few examples, again from Lori's class, just notice, if you would, how the tone is conversational, but how she as the teacher is modeling for her students what she wants for them to do on their own. So Lori, I can start us off, or you can jump in and talk a little bit about how you structured this pre-reading activity.
Okay, and this was actually your pre-reading activity because Chris is the one who wrote this. This is an ERWC module, and the big topic of it is, you know, looking at where our resources might be 1,000 years from now. Imagine getting teenagers to think what they're going to do 1,000 years from now. And so what responsibility do we have right now in helping to preserve those resources? And so this was actually Chris's question. So do you want to go ahead and talk about just real quick what the impetus is here?
Sure. So the curriculum that we're describing as a module is all about whether or not what human beings need to be doing now in order to make sure that the earth is self-sustaining in 1,000 years. And this is a pre-reading activity where, before they actually get into the substance of the module and do the reading involved on this topic, that they are asked to respond to this question about whether or not nature and civilization can coexist. And then you can see that Lori's response is there, again, first, so that she's contributing and modeling and showing students what she's expecting. She and I presented a year ago at the QM conference in Denver, and on our way out, this is what she was thinking about and noticing. So that's what she described to her students.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I wrote this response 3 years ago, or 2 years ago. So, you know, it doesn't matter when it was done, it's just done. And again, all I had to do was copy and paste it. And so so at this point, since this is early on in the game, the students are not going to be giving the kind of, very embedded, highly detailed responses. And it's not intended to, it's just intended to get them to start thinking. And so this student had it's the average response, really. In the first part of the module, this is the average response. And so what I wanted to do was to show what does agreement look like. So, her response, I think that nature and civilization can definitely coexist. We humans are given the responsibility to take care of our surroundings, not only us, but for other inhabitants as well. We definitely could coexist if we tried to take care of the earth. And so now my response is going to give an example of adding the information. And with my students, what I tell them is you have to add to the conversation. And that can be an example that wasn't brought up before, or a leading question, something that contributes to the information. And in this case, I put in what I agreed about, and I'm just basically saying that I think we are doing more. But I guess I also get a little miffed when I can't have a straw in my iced tea. I know that tons of plastic has been dumped into the ocean, but very little of it is composed of straws. I saw one sticking out of a turtle's nose on Facebook a few years ago, but I see that the soda pack holders are widely available, and those usually choke sea animals. It needs to be consistent. So this is an example of adding information for an agreement. Okay. I also want to model disagreement. And so in this student's response, I believe nature and civilization can coexist. The problem is getting people to understand this, and this is the problem we have to address. So I put in my own, and all of this is yes, it's taking me time to do this, but it is well invested time. And so in this response, I talk about how I think we are doing more and the retrofitting that's been going on. I talked about the recent earthquake in California that's really close to us in Ridgecrest, where it was a 7.0, and the fact that only one person died, and that was because he just happened to be working on his car, sitting up on a jack at the time of the earthquake, and it fell off the jack and crushed him. But nobody else had died because of the result of that. So these are what I'm looking for from my students as this module goes on. The next one that we can look at is when I ask these leading questions, and what I've learned doing this is that I also have to have students give a potential answer. If they're going to have a stretch question, they need to give us a potential answer with it. And so it's interesting that you say we are a part of nature. So let me ask you, do you think we are at nature's mercy, or is it at ours? I think that there are some things we should do because they are right, like recycle, use renewable energies, etc. But we will get kicked by nature in many ways. I don't believe global warming is something we can control, just what we can adapt to. So I've answered the question that I've asked. Can we control parts of nature, or what? So that's modeling the question. Another thing that I didn't provide the examples to, sometimes I will just, you know what, this reminds me of this little video or this commercial, or because in Canvas, our LMS system, we're able to embed YouTube videos. I just have to be careful with those because I'm the one who's been given the authority to approve the video. So I've got to look at it first, which means as soon as it comes up, I've got to look and make sure that it's acceptable, and then I can go ahead and approve it so other students can see it. But that's another possibility that you can do. So because of what Chris has taught me, these are the things that make it easier for me to do. So copy and paste the initial responses from archived courses, so that you never have to retype it again. So these are your initial responses. And then that first one, like we showed earlier with the, can nature coexist with, can civilization coexist with nature? Everybody's going to get a response. Yes, it's going to take me time to go through and do that. But every student has now at that point a connection with me. Then in the subsequent conversations that we have, I'm going to respond to about 4 or 5 in each of the conversations, because what happens is I'll wind up responding to the kids who are always getting there first. And we don't want to do that all the time. Every student needs to have interaction with the teacher. And like I said before, I set it up so that in the discussion board, in the linear part of that, students cannot move on until they've contributed to the board. And with this, Canvas does allow us to decide whether we want them to see other responses first or have them respond and then they can see the responses. And that's actually the better choice for me. I do notice that students do kind of trick the system and will write a period so they could see what other people have said and then come back. And I'm thinking, well, they're using it as a tool. And so it doesn't really bother me that much. I do keep a handwritten roster handy so that I can see who I've responded to, which discussion boards I've responded to them on, so that I can make sure that I cover all of the students within a semester. The other thing that is really important is that I have students will go back to, especially when we're in the reading comprehension stage, is to have them go back, look at their predictions maybe they made or something they talked about, and then ask them how have their opinions changed since that discussion board, or what looks different now. And that contributes a lot to metacognition. So students can see, hey, people were going in this direction, now we're going in this direction. So here's one example. This actually came from a poetry module where the students had read 2 parallel poems, and then I wanted them to go back and look at the previous 3 discussion boards and then allow a day to pass so that you can see new posts. And then after reading the response of the other students, write a description of how your understanding of the poems has deepened. How have your views changed? That comes from Kelly Gallagher. He's actually the one that suggests that. And so here's one of the responses. And how are we doing on time? Should I be reading this or just
No,
letting
I think
students?
we should just be referring to it at this point.
Okay.
Limited on
About
time.
12 minutes.
Okay, and so this is all metacognition, and this is a way for them to look at how they have responded to what other students have said. This could be another discussion board, or it could be just responses that I get. It depends on how I feel the whole core of the class is going. And actually with these seniors, and this is rather unusual, I have only 1 male in a class of 25. And so I haven't heard much from him at all. And I know that that's probably because he knows he's in a class with 24 other girls. But and then by the 4th module, so it usually takes about 4 modules for a whole semester. By the last one, I'm not hardly having to contribute to the board at all. They are having a great independent conversation of me. And so that's when you're front loading that time, when you get to the end, you have a little more time to just sit and watch.
Right. So just a few tips for recognizing success and hard work, and I'm hoping folks will contribute their ideas. One that I've used, which surprisingly students really get excited about, choosing a post of the week and publicly recognizing that student's stellar work. So in my classes, I email a copy of that post of the week to all the students, along with a shout out to the author and some reasons why the post was so stellar. And I rotate the winners every week, and you could even have more than 1 winner every week. So If folks have ideas, maybe you could post ways that you are recognizing success and hard work when you're having online discussions so that we can get some other perspectives. I think we'll come back to those if you have any to suggest at the end when we have a few minutes to talk. But grading is important, and I think using a rubric is well worth our time. In my class, we as a class use the rubric, and I annotate a strong post as a way to model for students what's expected. And this makes it easier for students to understand what it is that we're expecting of them. So this is a link to the first page of my guidelines and rubric for grading and assessing online discussions. And I think by providing the expectations on how they're evaluated, students are going to do much better. They really test us early to see if we are what our expectations are. So if we are on top of things and have clear expectations and guidance for them before we start, I think that's very helpful. One thing Lori does on every single page where she has an online discussion, she has a button that links to her discussion protocols. So this is helpful for students because they know discussion protocols, her assessment criteria are all just a click away, and that button appears every single time there is a discussion.
Mm-hmm. And the next one is my rubric. So this is actually set up in Canvas. So we did make on this slide the rubric. If you look on Lori's rubric, if you click on that, it is a hyperlink to the actual rubric. And so the one that's important is this down, Chris, if you can point to that 0.0 at the bottom. If it's worth 15 points. And so the contribution rhetorical value, that's worth 10 points there, but it is worth 5 points to give good quality responses, those two. And it says there did not respond to fellow students' posts or simply agreed with other students' posts. And so they get that all the time. And if the student doesn't give that feedback, go ahead and go to the next slide. What I've done is I have created a Google Doc, and I do this with a lot of other comments as well, but I have a Google Doc of my feedback. And so this is the one they always get if they have said, I agree, you did a great job, bonus, whatever. And so I just leave a room for their name. And then because Canvas does not notify me when they have come back to this discussion board and responded again, I have them inbox message me to tell me to look again at the assignment. And here are some other things that I use for the discussion boards. Always giving feedback, especially when those extensions start to come in and they're starting to get more detailed. There's plenty of things there that I use to help students guide them through learning how to do the discussion boards.
And so just another tip if you're new to this, giving students the suggestion that they use lots of white space is really important because it takes a lot longer to read in an online setting than it does on a paper copy. So short paragraphs with lots of white space make it easier to absorb the message. Just an example here, the same text, one broken up into paragraphs, the other not. One is much, I think, easier to read and more accessible. And in terms of numbers, group sizes above 25 are tough to manage. So if you have the ability to break groups up into smaller groups, that's helpful for them in terms of keeping up with the posts. And then timing, this is an asynchronous tool, so everybody does not have to be on at the same time. I typically give students a week to complete their work. There's a set schedule every single week, and the students really benefit from consistency. So whatever your schedule is for your students and your expectations regarding timing, I'd suggest keeping that consistent so that students know what to expect every single week. And then just a few highlights as we wrap up in terms of the role of the teacher, the importance of visibility. We're modeling, we're responding to students as we saw from Lori's examples as individuals. We're asking questions, we're probing, we're encouraging students to highlight. We're highlighting their best work, you can see those different expectations. And this last one of save your posts, because oftentimes you can use them in future courses without having to retype everything again. In terms of student roles, if they're visible, if we can see them posting, we know they're visible, that helps. Interaction that's meaningful, supporting their ideas with evidence, taking things seriously. So I think Lori and I just like to focus on excellence. And when you focus on excellence and expect excellence, you will get a lot better participation and a lot better quality. Few final tips for students. They're really just a quick rehash of what we've already talked about. And because our time is limited, I think rather than taking people through how to set up your discussion, either in Google Classroom or in Canvas, we have Lori's presented some screenshots on how to do that in our opening and our ending slides here, but I do want to make sure we have a little bit of time to take any questions you might have.
There is one here from Paula. Do you have any tips for facilitating discussions in asynchronous self-paced courses? And actually, Paula, mine are. Well, they're synchronous with the high school calendar. We still follow the quarter system. They do have to have grades done by a certain time. But what our program does is we tell students what is needed from them during the week. So basically everything that was assigned, and I keep a pacing guide of what would be assigned in a face-to-face classroom. So the expectation is that they would work for 55 minutes a day, but they don't actually have to do it every day. So these are pretty much asynchronous as long as they stick within that 1 week. Yes, we do have a lot of students who contribute late to the board, and they are deducted for that because they haven't had that, nobody can interact with them, but they're still interacting with students. So these are pretty much asynchronous conversations. Any other questions?
Or any suggestions? I'm not looking at the board, but any suggestions on how to recognize excellence in terms of your students' contributions if others are using discussion forums?
Let me see here. I'm
looking at the chat. I'm not seeing any.
Yeah.
Too bad. I was hoping to steal some good ideas.
I know. That's always the best way, is getting ideas from others.
Actually, one that we were at a conference, one of the last ones we actually got to go to, both Chris and I went to the California Teachers of English, and one of the ones I saw there, Flipgrid is a really great way of doing asynchronous conversations as well. When I get time to actually sit and play with it, then yeah, I'll probably use, I want to use more Flipgrid. Students really like that. Paula has said use emojis or trophies or rosettes. Yes. And
nice.
we actually also had one where this came from Dave Stewart Jr. He's a teacher in I believe Illinois, and he also uses them for, like, if you're not writing in complete sentences, he has a skull and crossbones that he'll put on. That's the feedback, so the kid knows you need to go back and write these in complete sentences because it's not written that way. And so that's a really good way. And we do have emojis, and one of the benefits now is that as you're typing, especially within Canvas, when you right click, the top line is emojis, and so we have access to them now, can use them in our writing. Thank you for that. And thank you, Chris.
Yeah, well, thanks for the folks who were with us today. Hopefully you took something away from it that was positive and helpful. And again, the links to our rubrics, if you're looking for rubrics, you might start with those, see what you think of them.
Yes, and the materials that you shared are out on the website, or I mean, at least the PowerPoint presentation or the Google slide presentation. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris and Lori,
we do have one more question.
Oh yeah,
do you have time
go
for
for
it?
Yes.
Okay, so do students who join late have to catch up on all the discussions they've missed? And the have to, I take that part out. What I've found myself doing is if they have to join within the middle of a module, I will tell students just to go through and read. But when it actually comes time to contributions, then I will tell them just put in the word excused, because that way they can still read it, but they don't necessarily have to contribute it because they haven't really had the time to read and process the information we've been talking about. So that's usually what I do when we have students who join us mid-module. That's it.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna stop the recording.